Well, I might as well continue with the satellite system story. This truck driver told us the story because it was too high to go under the bridges. And I said to them, and they weren't Christians, but God had I really ministered to them. The guys were ministering to them, and God really got a hold of them. And he said, you know what, Pastor? He said, I got to get the system home for you. I said, well, I don't want you to get a fine. He said, don't worry about us getting a fine. Don't worry about us getting under the bridges. I don't know how he's going to get under the bridges because it's higher than what you're allowed to go. He said, you know what? He said, I got specialized air shocks on this bed. He said, I'm just going to lower this puppy when I get to a bridge. I crawl under it and lift it back up on the other side. And so that's what he did all the way from Texas. Every time he'd come to an overpass that was too low, he would crawl up to it, let the air out of his, and then because he was overloaded too high, and they have those areas where you got to go in and get inspected. What he did is he would be communicating with guys in a CB, and they would tell him when he would pull off the road and wait until it was too full, and then he'd go by. So he finally gets it here. Well, now I've not only got the guys here, but I've also, and we had our big concrete poured out there, you know, and we pull in and we get a crane and we get everything off of his truck, and they head home for Thanksgiving just in time, you know, and so we're out there, and so now we got to put this thing all together. Now what I had the guys do before, I had them use paint, spray paint, like a orange paint, to mark where all the markings were before we tore it down. Not that that would really do a lot of good, you understand. But and so we had the women out here, the men out here, and I said, okay, we're going to put this thing up before Sunday. And so we get out there, and I'm out there, and the Spirit of God is on us again, and we're putting the system back up. You know, we get it all put up, and we get the building where it belongs, and everything is done. There it sat. Well, then came a time where the church went through just a terrible time. I said, Lord, you told me that we're supposed to be broadcasting 24 hours a day. And I can't get us up and running. I can't, so much money to get on a satellite, and can't get the speakers, and nothing's working right. And then bad things happen in the church, and we lost almost all the congregation, and it's sitting out there, man. And we got down to about 20 people in the church. 20 people. Went from 600 people down to 20 people. I'm walking around feeling sorry for myself, you know, and I'm walking up here one morning praying, crying out to God, and I heard the voice of God say this. He said, okay, broadcast. I said, what? He said, go ahead and begin to broadcast. Well, I know the voice of God. I said, okay, Lord. Now remember, this dish out here has to be perfectly tuned in. Perfectly. If you go behind, you'll see a boat every couple feet. It's got to be perfect. And just a bunch of us yahoos put it up. So it's sitting out there. So what do? I called up NPR out of Washington, D.C. And I said, well, listen, we want to buy satellite time on one of your satellites. We're going to begin to broadcast a 24-hour TV network. Well, I had all the equipment in place, but a lot of it was obsolete, wasn't going to work. And the uplink system, which goes up 22,000 miles, we don't even know if it works. Well, they don't care about that. So they come up, two guys in three-piece suits. They come in the front office. I've got 20 people in the church. We can't hardly make our bills. We're really not even making our bills. They put the paper down in front of me, a $250,000 two-year contract, $250,000. I don't have any pastors. I don't have the equipment. I don't have any money. And the Spirit of God says, sign it. I said, okay, Lord. So I signed it. They said, now you got 1 month to be up and running. Now you ain't got no preachers. I said, okay. So I called up a company called Antec right outside of Frederick, and they're still good friends of mine. And I called them up. I said, well, we have this uplink system. We got to begin to broadcast 24 hours a day, and we need to get this system. Do you, they call it theolighting. I said, do you tune these dishes in? They said, well, yeah, we'll come up. So they came up, and they're pretty expensive. I don't know how I'm going to pay them. So they come up, and they got their trailer, and they got all of their electronic equipment and everything. And they said, well, let's talk about this system a little bit, Reverend. I said, okay. Tell us about it. I said, well, we bought it from State College. They said, well, it's a good system. Vertex is like Cadillac for the industry. They said, tell us about it. I said, well, we tore it down, and we put it up. Their eyes got real big. They said, you did what? They said, you can't tear down a system like that. That takes experts. They said, you'll damage it. Who put it up? I said, we did. They said, I could tell them looking at each other like, you guys are nuts. And they said, and they said to me, they said, well, Reverend, They said even if it was put up right, to tune this dish in is at least $10,000. See, broadcasting is not cheap. You understand? This stuff is not, because we run radio stations and such. And I said, well, humor me. They said, what? They said, well, listen, even if somebody put it up the way it was supposed to be put up, it'd still be, you still got to theolite it. You still got, I said, before you do all of that, I said, just go ahead and set up your vector scopes. And I said, right now they're giving us time on galaxies, so forth and so on, transponders, so and so on, frequencies, so and so on. And they said, I could tell you lots of stories where God downloaded supernatural information into my mind where I knew more than what the engineers do. And I quit school at 15. So anyways, see, I'm not a thinker. I just do. When God says, do this, I do it. So anyways, what happened? So I said, just go out there and just, so they went out there and they set up their equipment and they hooked up the high power amplifier and producing a C-band signal and so forth and so on. And a couple hours went by and also I got a phone call. They said, Reverend, come out here. And it sounded like something was wrong. They said, come out here. I said, okay, so I walked out there, and they're all huddled around these spectroscopes and analyzing machines, and they said, look at this. And I looked, and there's a signal. And I said, yeah? And they said, Reverend, they said, this dish is perfectly in tune.